Imagine you are standing on the roof of a building in Tel Aviv. It is 11:47 p.m. The city below you is dark, not because of a power outage, because darkness has become survival, because 3 weeks into this conflict, every person in this city has learned the same brutal lesson: lights make you a target. And then you hear it, not one siren, two sirens, simultaneously, from two different directions. And your phone screen lights up with an emergency alert that says something you have never seen before in the history of this country's air defense system. 2 words, multiple cities. That alert, those 2 words on a phone screen in the dark, is where this video begins. Because what happened in the next 11 minutes above the skies of Tel Aviv and Jerusalem simultaneously was not just a military escalation. It was a strategic statement, one that mainstream media spent the next 6 hours getting almost completely wrong. And once I show you what actually happened, not the interception footage, not the government press conferences, not the carefully worded statements from officials standing in front of flags, you will understand why those 2 words on that alert screen represent a turning point that changes every calculation in this conflict. Because Iran did not just strike 2 cities at once. Iran demonstrated something specific, something that the people in the secure briefing rooms of Washington and Jerusalem are still processing, something that has no clean answer inside the current strategic framework. And neither city, neither Tel Aviv nor Jerusalem will look at the sky the same way again. Let's build this from the ground up, because context is not a footnote here. Context is the entire story. To understand why simultaneous strikes on Tel Aviv and Jerusalem represent a qualitative escalation, not just a quantitative one, you need to understand how Israel's layered air defense system is actually designed to function. The system is not a single shield, it is a network. A carefully integrated, geographically distributed network of batteries, radars, command nodes, and interceptor stockpiles that are designed to work together as a unified defensive architecture. Iron Dome handles short-range threats. David's Sling handles medium range. Arrow handles long-range ballistic missiles at high altitude. Each layer is positioned to cover specific geographic zones. Each battery has a defined engagement envelope, the airspace it can reach and defend. And here is the critical design assumption that Iran's military planners identified and chose to exploit on this night. The system was designed to defend against threats arriving from one primary direction at a time. It was designed to handle mass salvos against a single urban area or a single region. Every major wargame scenario, every defense doctrine update, every procurement decision for the past 2 decades was built around the assumption that the primary challenge would be volume lots of missiles aimed at the same general target zone. Simultaneous strikes on Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, 2 major population centers separated by roughly 60 kilometers, are not just double the volume problem, they are a fundamentally different problem. Because the batteries defending Tel Aviv cannot simultaneously defend Jerusalem, the radar coverage overlaps, but the interceptor batteries do not. The command and control network has to divide its attention, its processing capacity, its engagement decisions across 2 simultaneous crisis zones instead of 1. And in the 11 minutes that this engagement lasted, that division of attention had consequences that the interception rate statistics will never fully capture. Iran did not use its cheapest inventory for this strike. That detail matters enormously and received almost no coverage in the immediate aftermath. The missiles fired at Tel Aviv in this engagement were Fatah-2 hypersonic glide vehicles. Let me explain why that designation changes the defensive equation completely. A standard ballistic missile, the kind Israel's Arrow system was designed and optimized to intercept, follows a predictable trajectory. It launches on a ballistic arc, reaches peak altitude, and descends toward its target. Difficult to stop, but a solvable problem. The physics are known, the intercept geometry is calculable. Israel's systems have years of operational experience handling exactly this threat profile. A hypersonic glide vehicle is a categorically different problem. It does not follow a ballistic arc. After initial boost phase, it enters a glide phase traveling at speeds exceeding Mach 5, often Mach 8 or higher, but at significantly lower altitudes than a ballistic missile. This means it spends less time in the engagement envelope of high-altitude systems like Arrow. It is traveling too fast for many shorter-range systems to effectively engage, and its flight path is not a fixed arc. It can maneuver laterally during the glide phase, making the intercept solution a moving target in the most literal sense. Arrow was not optimized for this threat profile. David's Sling was not designed for this speed regime. Iron Dome does not have the engagement altitude or the closing velocity to handle a Mach 8 glide vehicle. In practical terms, a Fatah-2 strike against Israeli urban centers represents a near-seam attack threading between the designed engagement envelopes of multiple defensive layers and exploiting the gaps between them. Simultaneously, the missiles fired toward Jerusalem were a different type entirely. K-bar, Shekin ballistic missiles with terminal phase maneuvering capability, the same system that caused significant interceptor expenditure in the March 20th to 21st barrage. Maneuvering warheads, forcing Israeli defensive systems to fire more interceptors per incoming threat to compensate for trajectory uncertainty. 2 different cities, two different threat types, simultaneously. This was not an accident of logistics. This was a deliberate choice designed to force Israel's integrated air defense network to handle two qualitatively different technical problems at the exact same moment. What happened in the 11 minutes between the first radar detection and the final impact assessments is, in many ways, the most important story of this entire conflict, and it was almost entirely absent from the coverage that followed. The first incoming signatures were detected by Israeli early warning radar at approximately 11:34 p.m. The automated threat classification systems flagged multiple tracks simultaneously, some heading toward the Tel Aviv metropolitan corridor, others on trajectories consistent with targeting Jerusalem. The command and control network had to make decisions in real time that, under normal circumstances, would involve layered human review, threat prioritization protocols, and coordinated engagement planning across multiple battery commanders. Under simultaneous dual-city attack conditions, those processes collapsed into something much more compressed and much more improvised. Battery commanders in the Tel Aviv defensive zone began engaging the incoming Fata-2 tracks, but here is what the interception footage does not show you. The engagement parameters for a hypersonic glide vehicle at Mach 8 are operating at the absolute edge of Aero's design performance envelope. The intercept window, the brief period during which the incoming vehicle is within range and can be successfully engaged, is measured in seconds, not minutes. Simultaneously, battery commanders in the Jerusalem corridor were engaging the K-bar Shikan tracks, maneuvering warheads, multiple interceptors per incoming threat. For 11 minutes, Israel's air defense network was fighting two separate battles against two different threat types over two different cities simultaneously. The official interception rate announced afterward was 76% across both engagement zones combined. 76% sounds like a defensible number until you understand what it means in a city. 24% of the missiles fired in this engagement were not intercepted. Let me translate that percentage into geography. In Tel Aviv, 3 Fata-2 vehicles reached their targets. One impacted in the Ramat Aviv district, a densely populated residential neighborhood in the northwestern part of the city. The explosion destroyed 2 residential buildings and damaged 7 others. The casualty figures in that single impact zone: 23 dead, 61 wounded. A second vehicle struck near the Ayalon Highway corridor, the major north-south artery running through the heart of metropolitan Tel Aviv. The Ayalon is not just a road, it is the logistical spine of the Tel Aviv metropolitan area. Emergency services, military movement, civilian evacuation, all of it flows through the Ayalon corridor. The strike did not destroy the highway, but it destroyed a critical interchange and triggered fires in adjacent infrastructure that closed the corridor for emergency repair operations for over 4 hours. The third vehicle struck the port of Tel Aviv, the commercial port that handles a significant portion of Israel's imported goods, including fuel, food, and industrial components. The strike ignited fires in a fuel storage facility that burned through the night. In Jerusalem, 2 K-bar Shekan warheads reached their targets. One impacted in a residential area in the eastern part of the city. The other struck within the vicinity of the Malha Technology Park, one of the primary nodes of Israel's technology and defense industry employment base in the Jerusalem area. 5 missiles that got through across 2 cities simultaneously. 23 dead in a single apartment building in Tel Aviv. Infrastructure strikes with cascading consequences, and a demonstration, visible to every strategic analyst watching this conflict, that Israel's air defense network, even performing at a high level, cannot guarantee protection of multiple major urban centers against simultaneous hypersonic and maneuvering ballistic attacks. That demonstration is the real weapon Iran fired on this night. The missiles were the delivery system. The demonstration was the warhead. We have covered the cost equation in previous analyses. But the numbers from this specific engagement deserve their own examination because they represent a new threshold. Against the Fata-2 hypersonic vehicles approaching Tel Aviv, Israeli forces reportedly fired Arrow 3 interceptors, the most capable and most expensive tool in the defensive arsenal, at approximately $3 million per unit in engagements where the performance margins were described by defense analysts as extremely tight. The hypersonic engagement envelopes are so compressed that multiple interceptors per incoming vehicle were required not because of doctrine preference, but because there was simply no margin to attempt a single-shot intercept against a Mach 8 vehicle and accept the risk of failure. Estimates suggest 4 to 5 Arrow 3 interceptors were expended per Fata-2 track engaged. Against the K-bar Shekan tracks approaching Jerusalem, David Sling and Arrow 2 batteries fired at the familiar multi-interceptor per threat ratios established in previous engagements. Estimates again suggest 4 to 6 interceptors per incoming track. Total interceptors expended across both engagement zones in 11 minutes, estimated at 180 to 220 units across all system types. Total cost of interceptors expended in 11 minutes. Conservative estimates place the figure between $400 and $600 million. Iran's cost to execute this strike, the missiles, the fuel, the launch operations, the targeting coordination across two simultaneous salvo groups, estimated at $30 to $45 million. In 11 minutes, Israel spent between 10 and 20 times more defending than Iran spent attacking. And the Arrow 3 stockpile, the specific system, with any realistic capability against hypersonic glide vehicles, absorbed losses in this single engagement that will take months of current production rates to replace. There is no fast path to reconstituting that inventory. The production line does not have a surge capacity. The Allied stockpiles that might supplement Israeli reserves are not full, and the next strike is not scheduled to wait for the production line to catch up. The targeting of Jerusalem in this engagement was not militarily equivalent to the targeting of Tel Aviv, even though the two cities are neighbors in geographic terms. Jerusalem carries a weight in the global political and religious landscape that no other city on earth shares in quite the same way. It is simultaneously the claimed capital of Israel, a city of profound significance to the world's 1.8 billion Muslims, and a holy site for the world's 2.4 billion Christians. When Iran fires missiles at Tel Aviv, the international response, however intense, operates within a framework that has been established over decades of Israeli-Arab conflict. Tel Aviv is a modern commercial and military center. Strikes against it, while causing civilian casualties and international condemnation, do not trigger the same depth of religious and civilizational resonance that Jerusalem carries. Firing missiles at Jerusalem, regardless of what they hit, regardless of the specific targets, generates a different category of international reaction. It activates concerns and pressures that extend far beyond the immediate military and political stakeholders in this conflict. The targeting of Jerusalem was not primarily a military decision. It was a political and psychological one, and it was calibrated to achieve several simultaneous objectives that have nothing to do with the specific damage caused by the missiles that reached their targets. It tells the Islamic world, "We struck Jerusalem." Whatever the context, whatever the justification, that statement carries weight in the Muslim-majority world that Iran's leadership is acutely aware of and deliberately cultivating. It tells the Western world the conflict has reached the city that three major world religions consider holy. The pressure to find an off-ramp, any off-ramp, intensifies dramatically when Jerusalem is under fire, and it tells Israel, nowhere is categorically safe. Not Tel Aviv, not Jerusalem, not the cities, not the symbols, not the geography that defines national identity at the deepest level. That message is not delivered by the warhead. It is delivered by the targeting decision itself. The dual city strike has placed Washington in a position that American foreign policy has been trying to avoid since this conflict began. And the specific nature of the bind deserves to be stated plainly, because the mainstream coverage has not done so. The United States has two simultaneous and increasingly incompatible commitments in this theater. The first commitment is to Israel's security and to the maintenance of Israel's qualitative military edge. That commitment is decades old, embedded in law, backed by treaty relationships and intelligence sharing arrangements, and supported by significant portions of the American domestic political landscape. The second commitment, less formally stated but no less real in its practical implications, is to avoiding a regional war that draws American forces into direct combat against Iran, because a direct American military confrontation with Iran carries escalation risks that extend to every American installation, every American ally, and every American asset across the Middle East region. For 3 weeks, American policy has tried to thread that needle, providing military support to Israel, maintaining pressure on Iran through sanctions and diplomatic channels, while stopping short of direct military involvement in the strikes and counterstrikes. The dual-city strike, and specifically the use of Fatah-2 hypersonic vehicles against Tel Aviv, has made that needle nearly impossible to thread, because here is the problem that the Pentagon is now confronting in closed sessions. Israel does not currently have a reliable defensive answer to hypersonic glide vehicles at scale. Arrow 3 is capable against this threat class at the margins of its design performance envelope, but it was not optimized for it. The intercept rates in this engagement reflected that limitation, and the stockpile of Arrow 3 interceptors capable of engaging the threat is now significantly smaller than it was 48 hours ago. If Iran continues to integrate Fatah-2 strikes into its operational tempo, and there is no intelligence indication that it will not, Israel's ability to defend its major urban centers against this specific threat class will degrade over time in ways that cannot be compensated for by current defensive inventory. The only American system with robust, demonstrated capability against hypersonic glide vehicles at scale is the THAAD Terminal High Altitude Area Defense. The United States has THAAD batteries. They are deployed to protect American assets in the region and to fulfill alliance commitments elsewhere. Deploying American THAAD batteries to defend Israeli cities is not the same as shipping interceptors. It is not logistics support. It is the physical presence of American military hardware operated by American military personnel in active combat defense of Israeli territory. That is a line that once crossed cannot be uncrossed, a line that changes the nature of what this conflict is and who is in it. And Iran knows where that line is, and Iran's planners factored the existence of that line into the decision to use Fatah-2 vehicles in this strike. Because forcing America toward that line, forcing Washington to choose between accepting the degradation of Israel's hypersonic defense capability or crossing into direct involvement is itself a strategic objective. It is not a side effect of the strike. It is one of the intended outcomes. There is a conversation happening right now in the secure rooms of Washington and Jerusalem and Tehran that looks nothing like the public statements being issued from any of those capitals. In Washington, the question is, at what point does the cost of staying out of direct involvement exceed the cost of getting in? And is there a version of increased involvement that does not trigger the regional escalation we have spent 3 weeks trying to prevent? In Jerusalem, the question is more immediate and more brutal. We have demonstrated that we cannot guarantee protection of Tel Aviv and Jerusalem simultaneously against the current Iranian threat mix. What is our answer to the next dual-city strike, and the one after that? In Tehran, the question, to the extent that Iran's leadership is asking questions rather than feeling confident, is, how far can we push this before we trigger a response that exceeds what we have planned for? The answers to all three questions are connected, and none of them are answered by press conferences, interception footage, or government statements. What happened above the skies of Tel Aviv and Jerusalem in those 11 minutes was not just a military engagement, it was a test. A deliberate, carefully designed test of the boundaries and the breaking points of the entire strategic architecture that has governed this conflict since it began. Iran tested whether Israel's air defense network could handle simultaneous dual-city pressure. The answer, written in 76% interception rates and 23 dead in a single apartment building, is not reliably. Iran tested whether hypersonic vehicles could thread the seams in Israel's layered defense. The answer, written in 3 Fatah-2 impacts in Tel Aviv, is yes. Iran tested whether striking Jerusalem would change the political temperature in ways that create pressure for a negotiated outcome. The answer to that question is still being written, in the corridors of the United Nations, in the phone calls between foreign ministers, in the public statements that are changing tone in ways that are subtle but not invisible to anyone paying attention. Iran hit Tel Aviv and Jerusalem at once. Neither city was destroyed, neither city fell. The Israeli government is still functioning, the military is still operational, the country has not collapsed. The mainstream coverage will tell you that is the story, that Israel held, that the defenses performed, that the nation is resilient. And all of that is true, in the most limited and most misleading sense of the word true. Here is what is also true. In 11 minutes, Iran demonstrated that it can strike 2 of Israel's most significant cities simultaneously, with 2 different advanced threat types. It demonstrated that Israel's air defense network cannot achieve reliable interception rates against hypersonic glide vehicles under simultaneous dual-theater pressure. It demonstrated that the cost-exchange ratio of this conflict remains catastrophically unfavorable to the defending side. It expended an estimated $400 to $600 million worth of Israel's most critical defensive inventory, and it forced Washington one step closer to a decision it has been trying to avoid since the first missile was fired. Neither city was destroyed. But the strategic picture that existed before those 11 minutes is gone. And the strategic picture that replaced it is one in which Iran has now demonstrated, not claimed, not threatened, but demonstrated a capability to apply simultaneous hypersonic and ballistic pressure against multiple Israeli urban centers faster than the defensive network can reliably respond. The clock that started ticking on March 20th is still running. The interceptor stockpiles are lower than they were yesterday. The production lines are running at the same rate they were running last month. And the question that no one in front of a flag is answering honestly: what happens when the next dual-city strike comes and the Arrow 3 inventory is at half of what it was tonight? That question does not have a comfortable answer, and the people who know that most clearly are the ones telling you that neither city fell. They are not wrong. They are just not telling you everything.